surveying the area for future navigational purposes. They had to map out the entire area for other boats to use to be able to not get lost. And they found themselves with a rare amount of downtime. A lot of the senior sailors, they decided to rest, catch up on some much needed sleep, write letters to loved ones, but there was one junior crewman named Henry R. Ford, and he wanted to stretch his legs. He wanted to do a little bit of duck hunting on his spare time. So he got on a rowboat and he went up that side arm quite a ways, all the way to the end in the morning. And he went up during the slack tide, which is an important detail to remember in just a second. But while in that little sidearm, he had great success. He got a bunch of ducks, he was happy with his haul, and now it was time to return back to his crew. And of course, there's only one way to get in, the same way he came in. So he started turning around and making his way out. But this time he noticed something on the water. He looked out ahead. There was something white in the distance, and he couldn't really make out what it was. So he kept on getting closer and closer to it. And as he was rowing, the closer he got to it, the more he realized he didn't have to row as hard. He started getting sucked in. And before he knew it, he was now sucked in white, torrential, rapid water. What he didn't realize when he entered the little sidearm during slack tide was there were underwater land bars that were exposed. And as the tide rose above it, those land bars circulated the water, creating those rapids, and now he was stuck on them. He thought he was going to die. He was stuck for a terrifying 6 hours, trapped on rapid water. Right when he thought he was done for, the tide started to slacken, the water stilled, and he was able to return to his crew. And they couldn't have been more understanding about this traumatic event. They said, Ford, that must have been terrible. That must have been just one of the worst experiences you could experience at such a young age. We want you to go get some rest. We want you to have a good meal and just put this behind you. We don't want you to think of this ever again. But we are going to name the whole area after it, which is pretty messed up if you think about it, for your friends to name something after a traumatic event of yours. That's like me naming my neighborhood Applebee's my parents' divorce. Like, how am I supposed to move on from that? Absolutely terrible. But not only is that little sidearm known as Ford's Terror, but again, this whole wilderness area is known as the Tracy Arm Ford's Terror Wilderness Area. And that is just a little piece of the Tongass National Rainforest. And I figured I'd talk about the rainforest here for a little bit, because it is such a beautiful rainforest. And many of you have been asking questions about the rainforest, so it worked out. But the Tongass Rainforest, number one, is the largest forest in the United States. It's about 16.7 million acres large. But it's also the largest temperate rainforest in the world. Because it is a rainforest, we get a lot of rain. The Juneau area gets about 90 inches of rain a year, but there are some parts of the Tongass Rainforest that gets over 200 inches of rain per year. With this rainforest, we have pretty moderate temperatures that don't really fluctuate into extremes. During the summer, we get from about 40 degrees to 60 degrees Fahrenheit, and in the winter, it's about 10 degrees to 30 degrees Fahrenheit, which isn't terrible. You see that it's pretty moderate, not too many extremes. But this rainforest is created by glaciers from thousands of years ago because of deglaciation. Again, when you saw at the face of the glacier, it was very pale, bare rock. So what happens is a glacier deglaciates, retreats, and exposes rock for the first time in 1,000 years. And as it's scraping up against these mountains, it's leaving behind trace amounts of mineral soil, which isn't really good. But it's good enough for moss mats and for lichen and fungus to start to grow. And these moss mats are going to act as a bedding for smaller plants to grow. And these small plants, we call them pioneering plants, because they pioneer the way for future plants to be able to grow. And the reason they can grow in these not so good areas just on these moss mats is because rather than getting nutrients from soil, they are able to fixate their nutrients from the atmosphere. Some of these pioneering plants are beautiful canicular flowers like fireweed and lupin that grow. And as these plants grow and spread their seeds and dyes, they're layering more of organic matter, layering on top of each other for larger plants to begin to grow. When we were moving away from the glacier, you notice that it started to get a little more bushy in the area. That's red alder, that's devil's club, that's skunk cabbage, all growing. And all these plants are going to start interlocking their roots together. Those bigger plants, they're sharing their roots for those smaller plants to have stability, and those smaller plants in return are giving those bigger plants nutrients, because again, they're not on very good soil. Over the next few decades, some spruce saplings will start to grow, and then after about 300 years, the western hemlock tree, that warmer, green, bushier spruce tree with branches pointing downwards, will become the dominant plant of the rainforest. It takes about 80% of the vegetation here in the Tongass rainforest. Now, not only is there a tall western hemlock tree, those western hemlocks that you're seeing, they get about 150 feet tall. But there's also the Sitka spruce tree, that cooler green, skinnier tree, less bushy with branches pointing upwards. They reach an impressive 300 feet. Now, these trees, they can live for about 700 years. Now, they don't have to worry about forest fires because it rains here all the time. In fact, there's no geological evidence that there has been a forest fire ever up here. But what this area does have to worry about are landslides from earthquakes. In fact, that's why we're here in Endicott Arm today and not Tracy Arm, and I'll talk about that in a little bit. But they also have to worry about really strong winds. Warm air coming from the ocean currents and cold air coming from the ice fields will mix and create really strong winds in the fall. These winds can get up to 100 miles per hour and they'll topple them down. But it's not necessarily a bad thing for the rainforest. When these trees topple down, they'll create openings in the canopy for sunlight to reach those smaller plants. And because these trees have been taking so many nutrients from smaller plants that those smaller plants are sharing with them, and because they're so wet, when they fall down, they'll act as a good bedding for plants to grow from as well. So not only do you see plants growing from the soil, but also from these fallen logs themselves. There's this beautiful cycle of how small plants pave the way for big plants, and then big plants return all those favors back to the small plants. The plants of the Tongass rainforest really know how to treat each other better than we know how to treat each other better. Just because they're different, they share. Just because they're different doesn't mean that they don't share. And they always return the favors back to them eventually.